Hello and welcome back to another episode of Let's Chat. And joining me today is Mr. Jed Keith.
Howdy, nice to be here, Eli.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for joining me. When this fella here is not educating young minds about history, he's diving into the world of movies, television, comic books, and just a whole plethora of pop culture. Was that pretty on the spot?
Pretty on the spot.
With the entertainment website Freak Sugar, the candy for your eye holes. What the heck does that mean?
Well, the candy for your eye holes is not as weird as it sounds. It is a wide variety of entertainment resources as far as like interviews, movie reviews, comic book reviews, TV reviews. We interview a whole plethora of entertainment personalities to kind of get their like readers' eyes on what they have to say.
So what's your favorite aspect of that to cover?
Really, I think that my 10-year-old self would just be riddled with joy if he knew what I'd get to do like later on in life. Because with this job, I get to talk to so many different people and so many different creators and kind of get their insight about why they like to do what they do and why they like to write and why they like to draw and why they like to act. Things that somebody who lives and grew up in McCrae County in southeast Kentucky never thought I'd get to do. But now with the internet and how technology it is now, we're so interconnected that's one of the reasons I'm afforded those opportunities. I'm really grateful.
Awesome. So going back to the people you interviewed, who would you say, if you don't care to give us a couple of examples of some of the most interesting or fascinating people you've talked to?
Well, I had the opportunity to interview some of the cast from Community, which thankfully we're getting the movie.
There's a movie coming for that?
Yeah, if you're fans of Community, so you're awesome if you are. For the fans of Community, the whole conceit is that it would go 6 seasons in a movie. It's like a little in-joke for the actual show. It's gone 6 seasons, and we kept waiting for it and a movie, but it's just there were so many moving parts, like Donald Glover wasn't really involved.
Yeah.
Chevy Chase had his ignominious dropping from the show. So they are going to do on Peacock, which is a Universal and NBC streaming service, they're going to do and the movie. So, and they've gotten most of the cast back, and there's some members of the cast that haven't signed yet, but got our fingers crossed.
Is the show itself still on Netflix though?
It's on Netflix, it's on Hulu, and I think maybe Amazon Prime, but you can definitely get it on Peacock.
So, like anyone else outside of this community you've talked to?
It's like being a writer myself, it's really interesting to talk to a lot of comic book writers and just writers in general, just kind of get their process and just how they get their ideas. Especially comic book writers tend to be some of the most generous and giving of my interviews. Not that I've ever had a really bad interview, but I think that as writers, we want to talk about our craft and we want to feel validated sometimes too. And I feel like I've learned there are things that I've taken away from those interviews just that I've applied to my own craft. So they've been really, really helpful too.
Yeah, just going from one writer to another. So connection.
Yeah.
So from also my understanding, since I have you on Facebook, you're quite the movie fanatic yourself too, aren't you?
I am. I watch, like, especially since quarantine has kind of lifted a little bit.
Yeah.
Kind of dipped my toes back into the water of like as far as like seeing movies and as long as I can social distance, whenever I said. So watched quite a few movies this year. Since we're in spooky season, even though Halloween just passed, since we're in spooky season, one of the best movies I've seen this year was Barbarian.
Oh, that was such a good movie.
Oh yeah, did you see it?
Yeah, I will say slow beginning, but once it gets to the real weird stuff, it adds on to that WTF factor.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Some other movies I'm really looking forward to, Wakanda Forever.
Oh,
obviously.
yes, yep.
Looking forward to that. M. Night Shyamalan and, God, the name escapes me, but he's got a movie coming out with Dave Bautista, and there's an actor from the movie, the TV show Mindhunter, that they're going to be in it, so it should be pretty good.
Oh yeah, M. Night Shyamalan film, either or really good.
It's really hit and miss. I feel like once he tries to move away from the twist, I mean, I think that he had his bread and butter with it's a twist, but some of his later films where he kind of reins that impulse back in, I feel like he does better with some of his films.
Oh yeah, especially Sixth Sense. You can never forget that one.
Oh yeah, especially Sixth Sense. And anybody who says that they knew the conceit or the like twist.
No.
They're lying.
No.
They are
No.
absolutely lying. I've had friends try to tell me that. I'm like,
You think
you're
what
a
you wanna
liar.
think. Yeah.
You're a liar.
So, what would you say is your favorite movie of all time? Just what you've watched in your lifetime.
Gosh, it's like picking a favorite son or a favorite daughter. I would say a movie I've seen quite a bit the most is Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, that's a good one.
And I feel like that is kind of a very rote answer, but I mean, I've seen it on TNT and TBS and on cable so often, but also it's just, I'm a sucker for any movie that is so dark, but you see a light at the end of the tunnel. I was just having this conversation with my fiance that of the Dark Knight trilogy, for instance, I can see that the Dark Knight is a better movie and it has a better villain, but I like the Dark Knight Rises better, even if it's a little more slowly and clunkily paced, just because it has a message of hope that you don't really see a whole lot in Batman movies. So that's why I love Shawshank so much, just because it's oppressively dark, but you see those glimmers of hope. And I feel like I could pick like some movies that I feel like are very well constructed, but as far as just my enjoyment and what I get out of them, because I go to be entertained, I obviously go for the art aspect of it too, but I go to be entertained. I go, like, I read comic books, I read books, I watch TV to have like something that I can take away in my own life, and I think a lot of us do that.
What would you say is when movies were kind of at their prime, if you can really answer that?
I would say probably, and I feel like this is just because this is when I grew up, probably 1990s. I'm an old man. So I was in my teens and early 20s in the 1990s. You had so many things, especially like in the 92, 93, 94. I mean, you had Shawshank coming out, you had Pulp Fiction coming out. I think Rob Roy was around that time. You just had, it was like a banger, one after the other, I don't know if that's necessarily a fair assessment, but I think that's just whenever I started falling in love with movies with a capital M. I mean, you know, as a little kid, I'll just consume movies over and over and over. But I feel like that's when I fell in love with the idea of seeing a movie. Like, even when it's a bad movie, I love going to the movie theater because I feel like there's no experience like it. Because it's, you know, it's dark, you're fully immersed. And when you have a good audience with you, whenever there's a good audience in the movie theater, there's no experience like it because everybody's connecting in some way. And you can read a book and you can watch a TV show and you can read a comic on your own. But I feel like that watching a movie together is the closest that we can have to an immersive art experience. You know, probably the same way if you're going to a concert or, you know, or an orchestra. I just feel like as far as like movies and celluloid, that's the closest you can get to an immersive experience that way.
So what are your thoughts then on kind of the streaming services that are coming out in modern days? Because there's just so many. You can just watch movies straight from your living room now.
I know a lot of people criticize streaming because they feel like that it's hurting film in some way, just because you see a lot of movie theaters. I think it's a conjunction with COVID and with streaming. You see a lot of movie theaters like their quarterly revenue, which I only keep up with a little bit just so I happen to see it. You see them shuttering and closing quite a bit. But I also think that it's also really democratizing viewership, just because there are movies that I've seen recently that I would never have the opportunity to watch, just because I can just, like you said, it's at your fingertips. So I think there's good and bad to it. And I know that a lot of places are catering to streaming because they know that so many of us aren't leaving our homes as often. So I can see the good end of it. There is still a lot of merit and a lot to get from going to a movie theater. But also I feel like I wish I was a little kid when I was a little kid that I had these streaming opportunities, because I feel like that as much as I love movies, it would help my love even more. And I feel like I talked to some of my students where, like Eli said, I'm a high school history teacher. I talked to so many of my students and we talk about movies and they know movies that I know, but there's no way at that age that I would have known some of like the art house or, you know, maybe independent movies that they talk about because I just didn't have access to them. So I really envy them and I'm glad to see it too.
Now, I just want to touch a little on just kind of the art itself, the movies. Many can argue that modern day movies are kind of lacking that creativity, which I think there's definitely still creative movies, original movies out there too, but it goes off a lot of what's deemed as nostalgia baiting.
I can see that. Like, you mean in terms of like remaking a movie?
Yeah,
or
essentially, or like rebooting.
rebooting. I think there's merit to that, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because some of these movies, I mean, they're hit and miss, but I think some of these bring something new to the table. Now, is it monetarily motivated? Of course it is, but even the independent films, I mean, it's art, but everybody wants to make that leap from they want to get their work out there in some way or another. I heard, and this might be going off the rails a little bit, I love punk music. And a lot of people, whenever Green Day made that leap to mainstream, they called them sellouts. I'm like, they love music, but they also want to get paid.
Yeah.
I love writing, and I would probably write if I didn't get paid to do any of it. But also I have bills, and I can't fault them for that. Now, it's a little different if you're talking about some of these multi-million-dollar corporations or multi-billion-dollar corporations who are using nostalgia baiting. But for every one of those that they put out, they can afford to take a chance on some of these independent films. So they can make their money, they can make the big lump of money with like some of this nostalgia bait. But that's why we also get to see some of the smaller films we may not otherwise. So if they take a loss on that, it's not as big a loss. I mean, so you have to take the good and the bad.
You really look in the gray area between the black and the white. I respect that.
Yeah, and I feel like I get called on that a lot whenever I'm teaching too by my kids, or like because I'll ask them a one or the other question, and I would say, "Well, I'm kind of gray," and they say, "Mr. Keith, you're always doing that." And it's like because I can see all sides,
There
and
you
like,
go. We need more of that open-mindedness in today's climate.
oh yeah, it's not to get on politics, but it's very polarizing. Even
Yep.
I look at some like the Facebook groups, even for like entertainment movies, comic books. That's why we have some of the toxicity.
Yeah, like you see that in media too, especially with like MCU or these reboots coming out. You see a very big split.
Very much so, and I think there's this idea of pandering and catering. There's this group called Comicsgate that's out there. It's not like a fully formed group, but it's a lot of folks who think that like folks like the MCU who create content for the MCU or some of these other movies, if there's any diversity, people of color, somebody from the LGBT community, if there are women in traditionally male roles, they think it is pandering, which, let me tell you, I'm a straight cis white male. I have seen myself represented in comic books. There's 80 plus years of comic books that represent me. If somebody that gets represented who doesn't get represented enough, not only is it no skin off my back, it brings me joy. I see so many videos, like for example, whenever there's a live action Little Mermaids coming out, and been cast by an African American woman. I've seen videos where there have been little girls who say, "She's just like me." And that brings tears to my eyes because it's like everybody has the right to see themselves represented positively. And I don't know, I just think that's a good thing.
Oh, I come in here to talk about movies and I'm going to be leaving out motivated. So I say that about does it for this. Like I said, we just explored the wider spectrum that there comes with movies and just media in general.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me here. This has been a good conversation.
And that is a wrap.
How awful was I?